The village lay in near silence under a blanket of night, the soft murmur of the wind through cobblestone streets the only sound to break the darkness. Lanterns glowed faintly in scattered homes, and windows reflected timid flickers of candlelight, creating a mosaic of warmth in an otherwise cold evening. Yet amidst this ordinary scene, whispers traveled faster than the night breeze. People spoke of a girl named Elara, whose presence had always been unusual, whose eyes seemed to reflect distant stars, and whose spirit had been trapped by cruelty long before the villagers could fully comprehend her nature. They said she lived in the attic of her stepmother's home, a high and gloomy space where dust coated the beams and sunlight seldom reached. The villagers spoke of her quietly, fearful of invoking her attention, and yet unable to resist the fascination with her mysterious aura. A traveling merchant had recently arrived, and he noticed the hushed tones, the sidelong glances at a particular house perched on the village's edge. They locked her in the attic, the elders whispered when he inquired, their voices tense with unease, but the stars themselves will not be denied. Some nights, the roof glows as if pierced by light from far beyond the earth. The merchant, intrigued yet wary, found himself drawn to the stories, sensing that the mundane village life hid something extraordinary. Children peeked through narrow slats in the alleyways, imagining the girl trapped above, dreaming of secret escapes and whispers with the moon. Inside the attic, Elara sat cross-legged on a worn rug, her gaze lifted through the tiny window at the stars above. The wooden beams groaned softly, carrying the memory of her stepmother's strict hand and the silent weight of isolation. She ran her fingers along the dusty floor, tracing shapes in the accumulated particles, drawing constellations she had memorized from the stories she had heard. Each night, as she gazed upward, the stars seemed to respond to her longing, flickering faintly, winking in patterns she could almost interpret. The isolation of the attic was heavy, yet it had inadvertently nurtured her attentiveness to the world above, forcing her mind to wander beyond the walls and beams that confined her. The stepmother's cruelty had been subtle at first: extra chores, sharp words, and an insistence that Elara remain in the uppermost room even when visitors came. Over time, the punishment became more deliberate, the attic door bolted and barred, and locks added with every complaint from her stepmother. Rumors in the village had begun to take shape around these acts of confinement, though no one dared challenge the stepmother directly. They watched in silence, believing the girl's fate was sealed, yet unable to ignore the quiet glow of her spirit, which seemed to shine even from the darkened attic. Elara, despite her confinement, refused despair. She whispered to the night, to the moon, and most of all to the stars. They became her companions, her confidants, and her teachers in patience and observation. Some nights, when the moonlight was strong, her hair appeared to shimmer with silver strands, as if reflecting the heavens themselves. Her small acts of rebellion, opening the window slightly to feel the cool breeze, tracing constellations on the floorboards, humming songs learned from the forest beyond, were unnoticed by her stepmother but nurtured a quiet strength within her. The villagers could not see these small rituals, yet the world seemed to respond in subtle ways. Birds occasionally landed near the attic window, singing softly as if to comfort her. A stray breeze would sweep in through the cracks, stirring the dust into shapes that resembled familiar constellations. The attic, though a prison in the eyes of the stepmother, became a sanctuary where Elara could sense forces beyond ordinary comprehension. Even the stars seemed to lean closer, as if intrigued by her calm determination and gentle spirit. One evening, a particularly bright cluster of stars appeared above the attic, its light cutting through the small window with an intensity unusual for the night. Elara noticed the patterns, feeling a warmth in her chest and an unfamiliar sense of expectation. Something extraordinary was approaching, something that would challenge the constraints imposed by human cruelty. The very fabric of the night seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, a cosmic response to the injustice she endured. The merchant passing through the village would later tell tales of that night, recalling the sudden, inexplicable shimmer above the stepmother's home, a light that defied natural explanation. As the story of Elara and the stars spread in whispered caution and awe, the village learned to observe without interference. Children lingered at the edges of the square, staring at the attic roof, imagining a young girl with silver-threaded hair and the patience of the cosmos itself. Parents spoke in hushed tones about destiny, justice, and powers beyond comprehension, their warnings filled with equal measures of fear and respect. The night deepened, the stars glittered in the heavens, and the attic held within it not only a girl but a promise, that cruelty might be bound in the short term, but the universe itself had ways of intervening. The quiet, suspenseful night drew on, leaving the village in a state of expectant awe. Every rustle of wind, every flicker of starlight on the roof seemed significant. The tale of the attic and the girl who conversed with the heavens was only beginning. A power slept in patience, awaiting the precise moment to reveal itself to the world. In that suspended hour, Ilara traced the stars once more, her eyes reflecting their brilliance, her spirit untouched by her confinement, and her destiny quietly stirring like a hidden wind. Ilara awoke each morning to the dim light that filtered through the small attic window, the faint glow of dawn barely reaching the dusty beams where she slept. Her room, cramped and shadowed, smelled faintly of old wood and the remnants of last season's neglect. The floorboards creaked under her careful steps as she began her daily chores, sweeping away layers of dust, gathering firewood stacked near the corner, and tidying the few possessions she was allowed to keep. The attic, her home since the stepmother had locked her away, was a prison of routine, yet it was also a space where her thoughts could wander, a narrow stage upon which she rehearsed small dreams of freedom and kindness. Her stepmother, harsh and watchful, rarely spoke without biting criticism. Even the faintest mistake in arranging the few clothes or cleaning the tiny window was met with scolding. "Do not waste the morning," she would snap from below, her voice carrying up the staircase like the echo of a storm. Ilara learned to move silently, almost as if she were not there, balancing obedience with quiet rebellion in her imagination. Though the stepmother's cruelty was constant, it was seldom violent beyond verbal assaults, yet the suffocating presence of control made every day heavy, pressing, and seemingly unending. Ilara's father was seldom present, a man occupied with his work or distracted by obligations in the village. Sometimes he would pass near the staircase, glance upward, and mutter an absent-minded greeting, unaware of the despair and isolation endured by the girl above. His neglect was unintentional, yet its impact was profound. Ilara had come to rely on the stars and moon as companions, finding solace in their light and constancy. She whispered to them each evening, describing the small triumphs of the day, a neat sweep of dust, a crooked beam repaired with patience, or the rare smile she imagined she saw in the sky above. These rituals nurtured her gentle spirit, teaching her patience, observation, and the value of small acts in a world often dominated by cruelty. Though most of the village avoided her, drawn by rumors and fear, a single figure brought warmth into her shadowed life. Amma Lael, the village healer, would occasionally leave a small bundle of herbs, a jar of honey, or a whispered word of encouragement. "Strength grows quietly, child," Amma Lael would say, voice soft but firm. "Even under the heaviest roof, a light can rise." These gestures, brief and often unseen by others, reminded Ilara that kindness existed in the world, even if it was scarce. They became lifelines, giving her the courage to face each day despite her confinement. Ilara's solitude was not empty. The attic became a place of keen observation. She noticed the smallest changes in light and shadow, the patterns of dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, and the way the wind caused the wooden beams to hum softly. She memorized every crack in the floorboards, every subtle scent that marked the hours. Her mind, sharpened by isolation, developed an acute sensitivity to the rhythms of her surroundings. She could tell when rain approached, when someone walked quietly below, or when the stepmother's temper shifted before she spoke. These attentions honed her awareness and patience, essential tools for the extraordinary abilities that slept within her. Loneliness was often her greatest companion. Nights in the attic stretched long, filled with the quiet groans of the house settling and the distant calls of owls and foxes. Ilara spoke to the moon, imagining it as a confidant who could understand her secret thoughts. She whispered tales of dreams for freedom, of kindness extended to those in need, and of justice for those who would harm innocence. Each conversation, though one-sided, reinforced her sense of morality, her desire to nurture rather than destroy, even when cruelty surrounded her. It was in these moments that she discovered the roots of her strength: patience, observation, and empathy. The stepmother's cruelty extended beyond verbal scolding. Sometimes she demanded that Ilara perform additional tasks, such as repairing the attic beams, sorting a heap of cloth remnants, or mending clothes in near darkness. Each task was a test of endurance and will, yet each small success fortified Ilara's resolve. She approached every chore with care, finding a quiet pride in precision and attention to detail. Even the simplest accomplishments became affirmations of her inner strength and ability to endure. Through these routines, Ilara also cultivated a sense of wonder. Tiny insects that ventured across the floor became subjects of fascination. A stray bird occasionally perched near the window, pecking gently at crumbs she left behind, and she watched it with rapt attention. The play of light on the walls, the subtle shifts of the seasons as glimpsed through the small window, and the distant sounds of the village below all became part of a rich tapestry that nurtured her imagination and resilience. The attic, though confined, was alive with lessons that extended beyond the physical space and into the moral and spiritual realms. Amaleil's visits provided a bridge to the wider world. She shared stories of the stars, of heroic ancestors, and of powers that could influence nature and destiny itself. Though brief, these teachings resonated deeply with Elara, sparking curiosity about her own abilities and potential. The healer's gentle encouragement reminded her that she was not entirely alone, that guidance could come from those willing to see beyond fear and superstition. Each visit reinforced the belief that the world, though harsh, also contained allies, wisdom, and possibilities yet unseen. By the end of each long day, Elara would return to her small bed in the attic, exhausted but contemplative. She traced constellations on the dusty floor, whispered to the moon, and imagined the night sky bending close to hear her thoughts. Though the stepmother's shadow loomed large, Elara nurtured hope within herself, her gentle spirit growing resilient and patient. The attic, once a place of punishment and despair, became the silent classroom in which she learned endurance, empathy, and the subtle art of observing the world, a preparation for the extraordinary destiny that awaited her beyond the locked door. Elara had long grown accustomed to the silence of the attic, but one night, as she sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor gazing at the narrow window, something extraordinary began to unfold. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, sparkling as if in deliberate patterns. She had always admired them, drawing comfort from their distant light, but tonight they felt alive, almost attentive. When she whispered a song she had composed in secret, a melody of longing and hope, the faint pinpricks of light in the sky twinkled in unison, almost as though they were responding to her notes. Her breath caught in astonishment. Could it be that the stars themselves were aware of her presence, resonating with her emotions? At first, Elara questioned her own senses. Perhaps it was fatigue, the isolation, or wishful thinking. Yet over consecutive nights she noticed a pattern. Whenever she sang or whispered her thoughts, small changes appeared in the constellations above. Certain stars seemed to shift slightly, glimmering brighter, forming shapes she had never noticed before. She began recording their positions on scraps of paper, tracing lines and patterns with a stub of charcoal. The attic, once merely a confining space, transformed into her celestial laboratory. Every observation, every flicker of light, became part of an intricate study of her connection to the sky. Sometimes her emotions alone triggered subtle phenomena. Tears shed in loneliness caused tiny specks of light to gather along the window pane, reflecting like miniature stars in the darkened room. Moments of joy, such as when a bird perched near the window or when she completed a meticulous chore, produced brief showers of sparkles along the beams of the attic. These manifestations were small but undeniable, and Elara began to understand that her inner state directly influenced the world above. She learned to modulate her feelings, focusing on hope, calm, and clarity to see how the lights responded, discovering a delicate, almost magical relationship between emotion and celestial motion. Intrigued, Elara began experimenting. She hummed gentle tunes, drawing elongated melodies that resonated in the quiet room, watching for how the stars reacted. She whispered wishes for kindness and justice, wondering if the universe would mirror her intentions. Occasionally, when she accidentally felt anger or fear, the attic would shiver slightly, the beams creaking as if responding to her inner tension. These moments startled her, teaching a vital lesson. Her connection with the stars was not only a gift but also a responsibility. She could influence the cosmos, yet it demanded discipline, awareness, and respect for the delicate balance of her power. Elara also discovered subtle signs during the daylight hours. Sunlight filtered into the attic in slanted, golden beams, casting dust motes that danced like tiny constellations across the floor. She traced them carefully, seeing parallels with the night sky above. By observing these mirrored patterns, she began forming a map of the celestial cycles, noting which constellations responded most readily to her voice, which seemed to shimmer when she expressed hope, and which dimmed when fear gripped her. The attic became a space of rigorous experimentation and quiet wonder, where her powers were nurtured through patient observation and reflection. Despite the wonders, Elara remained cautious. The stepmother's cruelty loomed outside the attic, a reminder that discovery and growth had to occur in secret. Any overt manifestation of her magic risked punishment or ridicule. Yet the attic's isolation offered safety for exploration. She would sit for hours, practicing the modulation of her emotions, whispering her thoughts into the still night, and watching the stars' responses. Over time she could coax subtle movements, delicate flashes and intricate patterns from the celestial bodies, gaining confidence that her connection was real and potent. Night after night, this secret study became both discipline and sanctuary. She realized that the stars were more than distant lights. They were active participants, responsive to intention and emotion. Sometimes she imagined the constellations speaking back, forming shapes and sequences that conveyed approval, guidance, or caution. The attic's dusty corners became filled with diagrams of star patterns, notes about observed movements, and sketches of imagined celestial symbols. It was a personal, private cosmos, one she cultivated with care and devotion. Ilara also found that small tools could amplify her practice. Mirrors propped against the walls reflected the starlight deeper into the attic, magnifying the visual impact of her experiments. She used polished metal trays to catch and focus light beams, tracing the paths of reflected stars across the room. Even the simplest objects, a glass jar, a smooth stone, a scrap of cloth, became instruments to study the interplay of her emotions and the celestial response. The attic was transformed from a place of confinement into a laboratory for understanding magic that was part of her very essence. Through these experiments, Ilara began to recognize her responsibility. The stars were patient yet demanding. They responded to carelessness and misdirected emotion with subtle disturbances, reminding her that her influence carried consequences. Her understanding deepened not merely as power but as wisdom. She realized that she could cultivate hope, offer guidance and eventually defend herself and others, but only if she maintained discipline, empathy, and focus. By the end of long nights in the attic, Ilara felt both exhilarated and solemn. She had discovered that she was part of a larger cosmic web, that her emotions resonated beyond the confines of wood and stone, and that the stars were allies awaiting the moment she could wield her power responsibly. The attic, once a prison, had become the birthplace of understanding, the sacred space where she learned the first truths of her extraordinary gift, that patience, observation and emotional mastery were the keys to channeling the magic that lay hidden within her. Ilara's growing awareness of her celestial connection did little to shield her from the escalating cruelty of her stepmother. The woman's patience, once measured, had long since worn thin. Every small display of quiet defiance, every whispered song to the stars, and every flicker of light reflecting from Ilara's window seemed to irritate her more deeply. The stepmother's pride and fear of the unknown intertwined, fueling a bitterness that she directed squarely at the girl she viewed as both inconvenient and unnatural. The attic, already a prison, became a place of intensified confinement, the door bolted with extra locks and reinforced with heavy iron chains that rattled ominously whenever Ilara moved. Punishments became a routine in the household. The stepmother would leave small scraps of bread untouched and force Ilara to complete endless chores, polishing tarnished utensils, scrubbing wooden floors until her hands were raw, and dusting high beams that made her arms ache with every movement. Even minor missteps, a crooked placement of a chair, a spilled pile of grain, were met with harsh words and sharp gestures. The stepmother would storm past the attic staircase, slamming doors behind her, and Ilara would flinch, her heart pounding at the sound of the heavy locks clicking into place. Each punishment was meticulously calculated, a mixture of intimidation and psychological pressure designed to break her spirit. Not content with verbal and physical domination alone, the stepmother turned the village against her. She whispered rumors of Ilara's odd behaviors, that the girl was strange, that she spoke to unseen beings, that she could influence the stars themselves. Fear and superstition in the small village amplified these claims, causing neighbors to keep their distance. Even children who might have sought friendship or play, were instructed to tease and mock Ilara when she was glimpsed at the window or balcony. Their laughter, tinged with the coercion of adults, often sounded crueler than genuine meanness, and the girl learned to distinguish between mockery born of fear and malice born of spite. Servants and minor household helpers also became instruments of the stepmother's tyranny. They were instructed to withhold assistance, to misplace Ilara's few belongings, or to taunt her when the opportunity arose. She would sometimes return from a brief task only to find her broom broken or her swept floor muddied, clear signs that someone had deliberately undermined her efforts. The coordinated cruelty wore on her, but even as the oppression increased, she drew strength from the quiet connection she had nurtured with the night sky. The stars, ever watchful, seemed to offer reassurance, whispering patience and resolve in ways that defied ordinary perception. At times, the stepmother's anger seemed almost irrational. A slight sparkle of starlight reflecting from Ilara's hair or eyes would provoke furious outbursts. "There is something unnatural about you," she hissed one evening, pacing below the attic. "You flaunt what is not yours. The world is ordinary and you will obey it." The words, harsh and cutting, sought to instill fear, yet instead they quietly confirmed the uniqueness of Elara's abilities. Each act of cruelty, each rumor spread in the village, only deepened her awareness that her powers were connected to her resilience and moral core. Isolation amplified the intensity of her suffering. Days merged into nights, and the attic became both sanctuary and trap. The stepmother would check on her frequently, ensuring that the girl remained confined, her body tired from labor, her mind preoccupied with despair. The heavy locks, reinforced beams, and the suffocating presence of suspicion weighed on Elara's shoulders, yet paradoxically, these constraints heightened her sensitivity to the universe beyond. She began noticing patterns in the stars more clearly, seeing how their light shifted subtly in response to her emotions and intentions. Villagers, hearing the stepmother's stories, grew wary and sometimes hostile. Mothers would pull children away when they approached her home, warning them against the girl who whispers to the night. Yet even amid widespread fear, some in the village retained quiet empathy. They left small offerings near the base of the attic staircase: a piece of fruit, a small bouquet of flowers, a note with gentle words of encouragement. These secret acts reminded Elara that not all humanity had turned against her, bolstering her courage and reinforcing the knowledge that her suffering was neither invisible nor meaningless. One night, after an especially long day of labor and scolding, Elara lay on the attic floor, her eyes tracing constellations with renewed intensity. She could feel the tension of her stepmother's anger vibrating through the walls, and yet the stars above shimmered as if responding to her resilience. Tiny flickers of light danced along the wooden beams, reflecting the emotions she held tightly in her heart: hope, defiance, and patience. She realized that the very cruelty designed to suppress her was shaping her abilities, testing her moral resolve and strengthening her connection to the celestial forces. The attic, once merely a place of confinement, had become a crucible. Each act of punishment, each rumor whispered in the village, and each moment of mockery forced Elara to cultivate patience, observation, and control. She began to understand that her powers were not mere whimsy, they were tied to her emotions, her ethics, and her ability to endure adversity. The cruelty surrounding her was shaping not just her character but the very forces she could influence. By the end of the season, the stepmother's relentless oppression had transformed the girl she sought to break. Elara had grown attuned to the subtle rhythms of the stars and learned that even the most oppressive circumstances could not sever the bond between a resilient heart and the universe. The attic remained a cage, yet within it she had begun to master the art of patience, observation, and self-restraint, skills that would soon prepare her to respond to injustice in ways far beyond human comprehension. The night began like any other, quiet and cool, the village below settling into its habitual slumber. Elara sat on the attic floor, knees drawn to her chest, her eyes lifted toward the heavens. Though she had long watched the stars, studying their subtle shifts and patterns, tonight there was a sense of anticipation in the air, an almost tangible electricity that prickled along her skin. The wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden roof, carrying a promise that change was imminent. She did not yet know that this night would mark the turning point of her life, the moment when confinement would end and the universe would reveal its acknowledgement of her patience and resilience. Elara hummed a quiet melody, one she had composed in secret during countless long nights. It was a song of longing, of hope, of justice and resilience. As the notes drifted through the cramped attic, the stars above began to shimmer with an intensity unlike anything she had ever observed. Their light, normally delicate and distant, pulsed in rhythm with her song, as if the heavens themselves were listening and responding. Tiny points of brilliance stretched into faint trails, and slowly, one by one, the constellations seemed to shift, aligning in strange new patterns that radiated energy into the night sky. At first, Elara thought it was her imagination, a trick of fatigue and longing. But when a streak of fire shot across the sky, a meteor blazing with a brightness that made the village below stir in its sleep, she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. More streaks followed, hundreds of tiny meteors showering down in rhythmic succession. Each streak carried a soft hum, almost musical, vibrating through the beams of the attic and into her very bones. Her heart raced with a mixture of awe and fear, and yet she did not panic. Instead, she opened her arms instinctively, as if reaching to embrace the night itself, and felt a surge of energy answering her call. Then came the moment that would forever change her life. The wooden roof above, long a symbol of her imprisonment, began to shiver as if alive. The beams, worn with age, creaked under an invisible force. Light from the meteor struck the roof at precise points, burning faintly into the wood without scorching it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, cracks appeared. They widened, shaped by the rhythmic pulsing of the celestial light. Dust and splinters fell, and a narrow shaft of radiant starlight pierced the attic floor. Ilara felt warmth on her face, a soft wind brushing through the newly opened gap, as if the universe itself had come to liberate her. As the first clear beam of starlight touched her hair, she gasped. Her connection to the stars, long nurtured in secret, surged into tangible power. The small flickers she had observed for months intensified into brilliant arcs of light, forming delicate, shimmering patterns around her. The beams of energy traced constellations she recognized and some she had never seen before. The attic was no longer a prison. It had become a chamber of transformation. The magic that had slept quietly within her for so long now radiated outward, responding to the cosmic signals and her own latent will. Outside the attic, the village remained oblivious to the unfolding miracle, though a few night wanderers glimpsed sudden streaks of light streaking across the sky. A distant dog barked at the unusual glow, and the wind carried soft whispers through the streets. For Ilara, these were signs of affirmation. She was not alone, and the forces she had studied so carefully were acknowledging her readiness. Her voice, once merely a song of longing, now harmonized with the stars' energy, creating a resonance that vibrated through the entire roof, shaking the beams slightly but purposefully. The stepmother's abrupt appearance at the attic staircase, furious and shouting, was met with a display she could not comprehend. Light spiraled around Ilara, gentle yet commanding, illuminating the room with a radiance that transcended human understanding. When the stepmother reached for the door, the stars themselves seemed to repel her, sending a cascade of sparkles dancing along the walls and floor, as if warning her to keep distance. Fear etched her features, and for the first time she realized that the girl she had sought to dominate was not powerless. Ilara, awestruck by the manifestation of her own abilities, rose to her feet. She felt the light surge into her fingertips, a subtle, almost tangible warmth that responded to her emotions. Excitement and trepidation mixed in her chest, yet the experience felt natural, as though her years of patience, observation, and quiet defiance had culminated in this singular moment. The starlight, once distant and untouchable, now danced in harmony with her being, guided by her calm intentions and moral focus. As the celestial display continued, the attic roof finally split. A wide, jagged opening formed, letting in the cool night air and a cascade of starlight that spilled across the floor. The beams, once oppressive and confining, now framed her like the walls of a cathedral. Ilara stepped cautiously toward the opening, feeling a gentle pull from the world beyond, the stars guiding her to freedom. Every movement she made resonated with the cosmic energy, reinforcing her connection and amplifying her power. She realized that her confinement had been a necessary prelude, a period of preparation for a destiny that stretched far beyond the small village. With a final glance at the space where she had endured years of isolation, Ilara climbed through the roof opening. The stars shimmered around her, illuminating her path as if forming a bridge between the attic and the wide expanse of the night sky. For the first time she was not merely observing the universe, she was part of it. The meteor shower continued, streaking across the heavens in perfect synchrony with her heartbeat. She felt a profound sense of liberation, of purpose, and of awe. The attic, now bathed in starlight and open to the cosmos, had fulfilled its role. Ilara had been freed, and the night itself bore witness to the emergence of her true power. Ilara stepped cautiously through the jagged opening in the attic roof, the cool night air brushing her face like a gentle caress after years of confinement. The stars, now luminous and near, guided her descent, illuminating the rickety ladder she had long memorized but never dared to climb in earnest. Her bare feet touched the shingles lightly, and with careful movements, she made her way down to the edge of the roof where the forest began. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, their leaves whispering secrets she had never before heard. For the first time in her life she felt the expanse of freedom stretching before her, vast and alive. The forest was more than a refuge, it was alive in ways she had never imagined. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating patches of soft moss and scattered wildflowers. Tiny creatures scuttled through the underbrush, and luminous insects danced in the beams of starlight that seemed to follow her. Ilara paused to observe them, noting the subtle harmony of the forest. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, the trickle of a hidden stream, felt like part of a conversation. She realized that this world, untouched by human cruelty, resonated with the same cosmic energy she had sensed in the stars. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the starlight thickened, almost as if drawn to her presence. Shadows shifted in unusual patterns, and from between the trees emerged figures she could scarcely believe. Small ethereal beings hovered in the air, their forms shimmering with faint celestial light. Spirits of the forest, guardians of nature and cosmic order, approached her cautiously, their eyes reflecting the constellations above. Though initially wary, Ilara felt no fear. The same calm that had guided her through years of confinement allowed her to stand with poise and curiosity. One spirit, taller and more radiant than the others, extended a delicate hand pointing toward the sky. "Ilara," it said, voice soft yet resonant, "you have endured cruelty that would have broken most. The stars have watched and they have prepared you. Your connection to the cosmos is rare, inherited from those who came before you. You are destined for a purpose that reaches beyond this village, beyond even the bounds of this forest." Ilara's breath caught, and she nodded slowly, feeling the weight and significance of these words. The spirits explained that her mother had once walked a similar path, gifted with the same celestial affinity. She had been a guardian, a mediator between the mortal world and the heavens, and she had left clues for her daughter to follow. Ilara listened in rapt attention as they recounted stories of ancestors who could influence constellations, summon guidance from the stars, and act as vessels for cosmic justice. The knowledge was overwhelming, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had always been within her, waiting for this moment to awaken. Guided by the spirits, Ilara discovered that her magic was not merely visual or aesthetic. It could influence events, protect innocence, and warn those who sought to commit injustice. The stars were not passive observers. They were allies responding to the purity of her heart, her intentions, and the discipline she had cultivated during her years of isolation. Each shimmer of starlight, each flicker of cosmic energy, had been responding to her patience, resilience, and moral clarity. The realization filled her with both awe and responsibility. Her power was a gift, but it demanded wisdom and ethical consideration. The spirits led her to a secluded glade where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver. Here they demonstrated small feats of magic, guiding her hands to summon patterns of starlight, showing her how to sense celestial currents, and teaching her to listen to the quiet whispers of cosmic energy. Ilara practiced, and with each attempt her confidence grew. She discovered that the magic responded to intent as much as to emotion. She could create gentle radiance to illuminate the dark, subtle patterns to communicate with creatures, or concentrated beams to guide or protect. The forest became a classroom, each night a lesson, each step a discovery of her expanding abilities. While she trained, Ilara also learned humility. The spirits warned her that power without restraint could lead to unintended consequences. Even a minor lapse of judgment could disturb the balance of nature or offend celestial harmony. These lessons were essential. They taught her that true strength lay not merely in her abilities, but in the judicious and compassionate application of them. The stars themselves seemed to echo this wisdom, glowing brighter when she acted with care, dimming slightly when she allowed impatience or anger to surface. As weeks passed, the village faded into a distant memory, a place that had once been a source of confinement and fear. Ilara's sense of self expanded, her connection to the cosmos deepening with every passing night. She discovered hidden springs where starlight pooled in the water, trees that hummed softly with celestial energy, and creatures that seemed attuned to her presence. Each discovery reinforced her understanding that her destiny was intertwined with both the mortal realm and the heavens above. By the end of her initial escape, Ilara had transformed. The girl who had once peered longingly through a small attic window was now a young woman attuned to the rhythms of the universe, aware of her heritage and capable of channeling her powers with deliberate intention. The stars had not merely freed her, they had prepared her. And as she gazed back toward the village, she understood that her journey had only just begun. A path of guidance, protection, and eventual reckoning awaited her, one that would require every ounce of the patience, wisdom, and celestial attunement she had cultivated in the shadowed attic of her past. Ilara settled into a rhythm of training that became both disciplined and meditative, blending physical movement with celestial observation. Each night, she would rise before the moon reached its zenith, her bare feet on the soft earth of her forest refuge. The stars above acted as teachers, their twinkling patterns guiding her focus, and the cool night air seemed to carry subtle vibrations of cosmic energy. She learned to sense the differences in brightness, the slight shifts in constellations, and the quiet hum of starlight as it brushed against the earth. Every observation became an exercise in precision, awareness, and alignment of her own intentions with the natural rhythm of the universe. Initially, her attempts at channeling starlight were tentative. She could summon faint glimmers, tiny sparks that danced across the forest floor, or trace delicate constellations in the air above her head. Each display required concentration, and small mistakes, moments of doubt, impatience, or fear, caused the lights to flicker or scatter. These early failures were lessons in resilience, teaching her that power was not simply wielded, but nurtured. The spirits that appeared in the forest watched her silently, offering guidance only when necessary, ensuring that she learned discipline and patience rather than relying on external intervention. With practice, Elara's control over her magic grew. She discovered that emotion was both a catalyst and a risk. Joy, calm, and focus enhanced her connection to starlight, producing intricate, stable displays. Anger or fear caused bursts of erratic energy, sparks that sometimes startled nearby creatures or left the ground lightly scorched. She learned to temper her feelings, understanding that true mastery required harmony between heart and mind. The attic, where she had long whispered to the stars, had been the foundation, but now the forest provided a boundless laboratory in which she could explore the full potential of her powers. Elara also cultivated moral discernment. The spirits taught her that her abilities were not merely aesthetic or defensive, they carried responsibility. Cosmic energy could protect, guide, or punish, but only in accordance with fairness and ethical consideration. They showed her visions of potential consequences for misuse. A small imbalance could lead to environmental disruption, harm innocent beings, or even distort the natural order of the stars. These lessons instilled humility. She realized that the gift she had been granted demanded wisdom, restraint, and compassion, for her actions would ripple far beyond her immediate surroundings. Her training encompassed more than manipulating starlight. Elara learned to sense subtle celestial currents, minor disturbances in the balance of the universe that indicated impending danger or significant events. She could detect shifts in the energy of the earth, winds, and water that corresponded with cosmic changes, giving her a kind of foresight that was both practical and mystical. Tiny glowing symbols would appear at her fingertips when she focused, forming patterns that communicated the alignment of celestial forces. Over time, these symbols became tools, a language of magic that allowed her to interact with cosmic energies with precision and purpose. Alongside technical mastery, she cultivated patience. Her solitary training demanded long hours of quiet observation, waiting for the right alignment of stars, the proper emotional state, or the precise resonance of cosmic energy. She learned that rushing her actions disrupted the natural flow and caused unpredictable results. Every night became a test of endurance, observation, and calm decision-making. Through these practices, Elara's mind grew disciplined, her heart steady, and her perception of time expanded. The discipline required to control her power shaped her character, reinforcing her gentleness, empathy, and awareness. Confidence gradually followed patience. Each successful display of starlight, every subtle alignment she achieved, confirmed her growing mastery. She realized that her abilities were not random anomalies but extensions of her own moral and emotional clarity. The knowledge that she could summon cosmic forces responsibly imbued her with a quiet strength, one that went beyond pride. It was the steady assurance that she could act effectively, thoughtfully, and ethically, regardless of external pressures or the cruelty she had endured in the village. Elara also experimented with creative applications of her powers. She traced elaborate patterns in the sky, producing shimmering constellations that could be glimpsed for miles, and communicated silently with animals attuned to cosmic energies. Small miracles began to occur, streams illuminated at night by gentle starlight, plants growing in harmony with moon phases, and subtle healing effects on minor wounds or fatigue. Each manifestation reinforced the interconnectedness of her magic, the natural world, and the celestial order. The forest became a living classroom, teaching her both power and empathy in tandem. Her development was guided not only by magical practice but by reflection. She would sit quietly in glades, contemplating the ethical implications of her abilities, imagining the ways she could intervene to protect the innocent or correct injustices. These contemplations, paired with hands-on practice, allowed her to integrate skill with wisdom. Elara understood that her magic was an instrument, and like any instrument, it could be used for creation, protection, or destruction. She vowed that her path would honor life, justice, and the harmony of the universe. By the end of her period of growth, Elara had transformed. Her power was formidable, precise, and tempered with empathy. Her connection to the stars and cosmic forces was complete, and she understood her place within the larger web of life and energy. The girl who had once been locked in an attic, trembling and voiceless, now stood as a confident young woman, ready to step into a destiny that stretched beyond the forest and the village below. With patience, wisdom, and moral clarity, she had become a guardian not only of herself but of the balance between mortal and celestial realms. Ilara's journey back to the village was deliberate, guided by both caution and the knowledge she had gained during her exile. The forest that had sheltered her and nurtured her powers gradually gave way to the familiar paths leading to the village outskirts. Though the homes and streets were unchanged, she observed subtle shifts. Overgrown gardens, abandoned tools, and the quiet unease in the air hinted that time had passed and that the village's moral balance was still fragile. She knew that her return could not be casual. The cruelty she had endured demanded justice, yet the innocent deserved protection. She began with quiet observation, sending her starlight as soft whispers across the village. Tiny flickers of illumination appeared in windows, tracing patterns that revealed hidden truths to those capable of seeing. Secrets long concealed, rumors of the stepmother's misdeeds, the bullying of neighbors and the greed of certain villagers, were subtly unveiled through these celestial signals. No one was physically harmed, but those attuned to the magical patterns could not ignore the messages. Fear and reflection settled over the village, an intangible reminder that actions carried consequences. The stepmother, still bitter and arrogant, remained at her home, unaware of the growing presence of power approaching. Ilara chose a moment when the village slept, the streets silent except for the occasional howl of a distant animal. She hovered on the outskirts, allowing starlight to pool and intensify over the stepmother's dwelling. The light seeped through cracks in doors and windows, illuminating her misdeeds. Symbols of judgment, glimmering constellations visible only to those whose hearts harbored malice, appeared above her head, forming an invisible, yet undeniable verdict. The stepmother awoke in terror, the air vibrating with cosmic energy she could not comprehend, and for the first time she experienced a fraction of the fear and helplessness she had inflicted upon Ilara. Ilara moved through the village with precision. Those who had acted cruelly, Rammel, Taro, and others who had perpetuated bullying and injustice, encountered consequences that reflected their actions. Hot, spectral winds lifted around their homes, dislodging objects and startling them into reckoning with their past misdeeds. Footpaths that had been trodden without thought now shifted beneath their feet, leaving them disoriented and humbled. No life was taken unnecessarily, yet each person felt the gravity of the universe responding to wrongdoing. Ilara's approach was both restorative and disciplinary. She sought neither vengeance for its own sake nor mercy without awareness of responsibility. At the same time, she ensured that innocents were protected. Windows glowed gently when families were asleep, guiding them away from danger or accident. Pets, livestock, and children found small miracles. Milk remained unspoiled, fire stayed controlled, and minor injuries healed overnight. The stars, once distant and untouchable, now acted in concert with her intentions, reinforcing the balance between punishment and protection. Villagers soon noticed these subtle interventions, and while some feared the source, others marveled at the inexplicable benevolence that had settled over the village. Confrontation with the stepmother reached a climax when Ilara revealed herself in the courtyard, her presence radiating a gentle yet undeniable power. The villagers gathered cautiously, unsure whether the girl they had long tormented was now a threat or a miracle. Ilara's gaze met her stepmother's with calm authority. She did not speak initially, instead the stars above began to align, forming luminous shapes that mirrored the stepmother's misdeeds. Each symbol acted as both warning and reflection, showing the cruelty she had inflicted in the past. The stepmother's pride faltered, and for the first time she comprehended the full magnitude of her actions. Ilara spoke then, softly but firmly, addressing both the stepmother and the villagers. Her words were imbued with the authority of cosmic forces, yet tempered with compassion. She recounted her experiences, her endurance, and the lessons she had learned from the stars. The villagers listened, their fear and awe intertwined, realizing that justice need not be violent to be absolute. The stepmother, humbled and shamed, acknowledged her misdeeds, tears reflecting the starlight as she promised to change her ways. With the balance restored, Ilara turned her attention to the village at large. She restored crops subtly, guided water to parched fields, and ensured the well-being of animals and families. Children, once cruel or frightened, were given small glimpses of her magic, tiny lights that danced playfully at night, teaching them respect and reverence for the forces that connect all living things. The village, shaken by fear but nurtured by wonder, began to recover, its moral compass subtly realigned by the presence of a power that demanded accountability yet allowed for mercy. By dawn, the courtyard was quiet once more. Ilara had completed her subtle reckoning. Her stepmother had been humbled, the cruel villagers warned, and the innocents shielded. She lingered briefly, feeling the pulse of the village beneath her feet, the soft hum of the starlight echoing the balance she had restored. Then, as the first light of morning touched the rooftops, she stepped away, leaving behind a village forever aware of both her presence and the cosmic forces that had guided her. Her return had been both a revelation and a lesson. The stars had chosen her to act, and she had fulfilled her role with wisdom, courage, and grace.